Welcome to the Almost Unbelievable YouTube channel with me, your host, Ranty. Thank you very much for stopping by. Now then, who can remember their first day at high school? I know I can. I had a great time. Who can remember getting their first driving license, or turning 18, or for that matter, even becoming a teenager? And I'm sure you all have very fond memories of those times, right? But for one person, that wasn't the case. One 11-year-old boy, some 20 years ago, his entire life was about to change. And we're going to talk about that story today. The year was 2005, and a young 11-year-old boy who lived in Waterbury, Connecticut, had been going to school at Bernard Elementary. It was there in the 4th grade that he stood out to a lot of his friends and teachers for reasons other than excellence. You see, his clothes didn't fit, he was always hungry, he always looked pale, his teeth never looked correct. In fact, they were stained and chipped. So this stood out, and social services decided to take a look and see what was going on. They conducted an investigation and essentially agreed to have the child homeschooled instead of going to school. It was there that everything changed for this young boy, and his life would never be the same again. The residential address was 2 Blake Street, and he lived in a little box room no bigger than 8 feet by 9 feet, so pretty small really. And this tiny room was going to be the place where he would live for the vast majority of the next 20 years, only being allowed out of that particular room to do chores around the house, or occasionally go out with his father to do chores around the garden. Now, these chores could last anywhere from 15 minutes a day to 2 hours a day, and aside from that, the only place that he stayed was that room, 8 feet by 9 feet. The room had no heating, and it would seem that it was unlikely that any fresh air was allowed to circulate around the room. You see, the windows had been locked shut. To all intents and purposes, this was a prison for this young boy. The only door to the room was kept shut. In fact, it was not just shut, it was bolted from the outside. In fact, over the years, you can see individual little markings on the door casings where different types of bolts or locks had been used to keep the boy in the room. This also meant that he had no opportunity to use the toilet. In fact, his means of getting rid of his urine would be to pee into a bottle, and then by using straws that he'd pushed through a little hole that was in the window, was able to pour the urine out and out of the room. When it came to defecating, he would do so by defecating on some newspaper, rolling it up and saving it to get rid of at a later date. In all his time there, he never had access to doctors, to dentists, to nobody. He was dirty. He wasn't allowed to wash. In fact, the only means of washing was him using the very sparse amount of water that he would get on a daily basis and washing himself just to try and stay a little bit clean. His food was also rationed to the point where he was only eating 2 sandwiches every day, and 2 bottles of water were his only means of liquid. The boy was being starved, and as the boy got older and taller, his body deteriorated. It got to the point where he would be eating some food and parts of his teeth would literally fall out into his food. He had no access to dentistry, he had no access to toothpaste, so his teeth were clearly being affected and his body weight was dropping dramatically. And as the years went by, the boy got taller and yet skinnier and skinnier. And after enduring these conditions for 20 years, finally he decided to make a break for it. He decided he'd had enough, and he had the tools with which to start a fire. He had some hand sanitizer, he had some printer paper, and he had a lighter that he had got from some clothing handed down to him after his father had died. He'd gone into one of the pockets and found it there and kept it secret for over a year. But now was his time. He was going to start a fire because he knew that if he started a fire and the fire brigade came and they came to rescue him, he would be free. He could tell people what had been going on and his ordeal would be over. But it all hinged on getting the fire started and keeping himself alive long enough to be rescued by the fire department. Now those minutes that passed, the time before he set fire to his room and waiting for the fire brigade to arrive, must have been the longest 5 or 10 minutes of his entire life. As the room started to fill with smoke and the heat came from the fire and the whole house started to burn, he must have been petrified. But in his own mind he decided, it's either I die here and now or I get out of here and I get free. I can finally be free of my captor. One thing was going to happen: death or freedom. Luckily for him, it was the latter. On the 17th of February of this year, 2025, a call was placed to 911 by Kimberly Sullivan, who said that her house was on fire. She also told them that her stepson was still inside of the property, and the fire brigade rushed to the scene to try and quell this fire. The video you're watching on screen right now is body cam footage taken at the time, and inside of this video you can actually see the moment where MV1, who is the male victim 1, the boy we are talking about at the age of 32, is literally being carried by a firefighter and taken to the emergency room. It was here that his entire story came to light, and he told them that he was the one who started the fire. And it was there and then, once he knew that he was free from Kimberly, that he was able to explain what had gone on. And he would tell them this incredible tale, one that obviously needed some kind of verification. And so the police and firemen went back into the property once the blaze was contained, and they were able to check to see whether or not they could verify anything about what this boy had been telling them. Once he was free, he was able to start expressing himself and telling the fire brigade and the police what had gone on. And of course, they're hearing these things and they have to go and verify. They have to try and see whether or not there's any shred of evidence as to what this boy had claimed. Now, of course, I keep saying that he is a boy, but of course we all know that by now he's 32 years of age. He's 5'7" and he weighs a pathetic 68 pounds. He's been described as looking like an Auschwitz survivor. He was that skinny. His hair was matted, he was dirty, and of course, his teeth were all rotten. This raised alarm bells. The police went off to check, and they were able to, in a lot of ways, verify what I've just told you as the story as we know it from the perspective of MV1. Now, of course, this is an ongoing story, and we have Kimberly who denies any of this. I guess we'll find out over the coming months what actually transpired. But for now, we do know that she has been charged with assault, kidnapping, unlawful restraint, cruelty, and reckless endangerment. The man who had been kept in isolation for 20 years simply said to the fireman, "I just wanted my freedom." And what a cry for help that would have been, to actually think that you are in this room and for 20 years you've missed out on so much. For 20 years you've sat in this room and your only means of escape is by literally setting fire to your room, the room that you are sitting inside of. It sounds crazy, but this was the desperation that he was in. He had to do something. Now that he is free, we're getting reports from people like Police Chief Fernando Spagnola, who said, in 33 years of law enforcement, this is the worst treatment of humanity that I have ever witnessed. In reference to Kimberly, the police say that she had kept him locked in a tiny room since he was 11, starving him and forcing him to drink out of a toilet. Medical personnel say the man was near starvation and had wasting syndrome, a condition of weight loss and muscle deterioration. He was also said to have been treated for smoke inhalation and diagnosed with not only post-traumatic stress disorder, but also depression. And is that surprising that he's been diagnosed with all those ailments? I don't think so. Did he decide to leave himself in that room all by himself? I don't think so. Does his account hold any validity? Well, it would seem that the police think so, as per the charges. So, I guess only time will tell where this ends up. Now, of course, there are two sides to every story, and this is an ongoing case. Yet we have the testimony from one man, a 32-year-old man, who weighed a mere 68 pounds when he was found. And he came up with this story that seems to have been validated by some of what the police can actually see at the scene. On the other hand, we have Kimberly, who says that he wasn't locked in the room at all. In fact, Sullivan has said that she is innocent and looks forward to clearing her name. All I can say is that this is one of the craziest stories that I've heard in a very long time, and thought that I would bring it to your attention because I felt that today's story was almost unbelievable. I'll see you in the next one.